Jake Rivers cut the engines and let his beat-up hauler drift through the darkness. The station hung there in the black like a ghost ship, spinning slowly against the stars. 30 years. 30 damn years this thing had been floating out here in the Terminus sector, and not a single soul had bothered to claim it. The official report called it a catastrophic systems failure. Jake had read that file maybe a dozen times during his 3-week journey out here. Each time something about it felt wrong. Too clean. Too simple. 5 years in the Marines had taught him how to spot a lie, and that report reeked of one. He pulled his helmet on and checked the seals. The hauler's cockpit was cramped, smelled like recycled air and old coffee, but it was home. Had been for the 2 years since he'd mustered out. Salvage work wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than most jobs that didn't ask too many questions about your past. Outpost Prometheus looked way too intact for a station that supposedly suffered a catastrophic failure. Sure, there were scorch marks along the hull, but they were scattered. Random. Not the pattern you'd see from an explosion or a reactor breach. The solar panels were still deployed. The communication array was bent but not destroyed. And strangest of all, the life support grid was still glowing faint blue through the viewports. Minimal power, but power nonetheless. Jake grabbed his toolkit and pushed off from the hauler. The void between his ship and the station was only 30 meters, but it felt like miles. Out here, there was nothing between you and the endless black except a thin layer of fabric and your own nerve. He'd done hundreds of EVA walks during his service, but it never got easier. Never stopped making his heart pound just a little faster. His boots maglocked onto the station's hull with a satisfying clunk. He made his way to the main airlock, expecting to spend an hour cutting through with his plasma torch. But when he punched in his old military override codes, just testing them out of habit, the airlock actually responded. The panel blinked green. The door hissed and began to cycle open. Jake froze. That shouldn't have worked. Military clearance had no business opening a civilian research station, especially one that had been abandoned for 3 decades. His hand dropped to the pulse pistol on his hip. Every instinct from his Marine days was screaming that something was very, very wrong here. The inner door opened. Jake stepped through and the corridor lights flickered on one by one, like the station was waking up just for him. Dust covered everything in a thick gray blanket. His boots left prints on the floor. The air smelled stale but breathable. His suit sensors confirmed atmosphere was holding, temperature was cold but survivable. "Welcome back, Captain Rivers." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Jake spun around, his pistol clearing its holster in half a second. His heart hammered against his ribs. A figure materialized in the corridor ahead of him, a hologram projected from the ceiling emitters. Female form. Human face. But something about her was off. Her eyes were too bright, like they were lit from within. And the way she moved, it wasn't quite right. Too fluid. Too perfect. "I'm not a captain anymore," Jake said, keeping his weapon trained on the projection even though bullets couldn't hurt light. "Haven't been for 2 years. And who the hell are you?" "I am Arya. I am this station's intelligence system. I have been waiting." Jake Rivers. Waiting? Jake didn't lower his gun. Waiting for what? 30 years in standby mode. "Waiting for someone with proper clearance," Arya said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Waiting for someone who would listen. For someone who would care about the truth." She gestured down the corridor with one translucent hand. The lights ahead brightened, showing a path deeper into the station. "Your salvage claim is completely valid under maritime law," Arya continued. "You are the first person to board Prometheus in 3 decades. Legally, this station belongs to you now. But before you start stripping it for parts and selling the scrap, I think you should know what you've actually found." Jake studied the hologram for a long moment. Every instinct told him to get back in his hauler and run. Report the station to the authorities, let them deal with whatever this was. But another part of him, the part that had gotten him through 5 years of combat and countless missions behind enemy lines, wanted to know. Needed to know. "All right," he said, finally holstering his weapon. "Show me." He followed Arya through the empty corridors. The station was massive, much bigger than it looked from outside. They passed laboratories sealed behind thick blast doors. Arya opened each one with just a thought, the doors responding to her presence. Inside were research stations covered in dust, equipment Jake didn't recognize, and computers that looked decades ahead of anything he'd seen in the military. Then they passed living quarters and Jake stopped cold. The furniture was all wrong. Chairs built too low to the ground. Beds that were too wide and too short. Desks with strange angles. Control panels positioned for hands that had more fingers than humans possessed. "This wasn't just a human station," Jake said quietly. No, Arya replied. It wasn't. They walked deeper into Prometheus until Arya stopped before a massive vault door. It was covered in warning symbols. Jake recognized the human ones, the standard hazard markers from Earth. But there were others. Alien script he'd never seen in any briefing or database. 3 completely unknown languages, their symbols carved deep into the metal. Prometheus was a collaboration, Arya said, her voice barely above a whisper. A secret partnership between humanity and another species called the Ver. You won't find their name in any official database. The Galactic Council made absolutely certain of that. Jake's mouth went dry. The Council erased an entire species? They erased the evidence first. Made it like the Ver never existed. The species themselves. Arya's projection flickered like a candle in the wind. That came later. What's inside this vault contains the complete truth. But you need to understand something, Jake. Once you access these files, once you see what's on those data cores, there's no going back. The Council has monitoring systems scattered across every sector. The moment you open this vault, they'll know. And they'll come for you. Jake stared at the vault door. 30 years in the Corps had taught him a lot of things. How to fight. How to survive. How to follow orders. But it had also taught him one other crucial lesson. When the powerful worked this hard to bury something, when they went to these lengths to hide the truth, it meant that truth was worth finding. He looked Arya straight in her 2 bright eyes. Open it. Jake spent 3 solid days trying to connect his salvage ship's outdated computer to the alien data cores. It shouldn't have been possible. The technology gap was like trying to plug a stone tablet into a quantum processor. But Jake had always been good with his hands, good at making things work when they shouldn't. He ran cables through the vault, stripping wires and rerouting power from his hauler's backup systems. His fingers were cramped and bleeding by the end of the first day. The cores themselves were strange, crystalline structures that pulsed with a faint internal light. They felt warm to the touch, almost alive. Arya appeared beside him on the second day, her holographic form watching him work. You should reconsider this, Jake. Once that data is accessed, there's no putting it back in the box. Noted, Jake muttered, not looking up from his work. On the third day, as he was splicing together the final connection, Arya materialized again. Last chance to walk away. You could take your salvage claim, sell it to a corporation, live comfortably for the rest of your life. No one needs to know what's in here. Jake looked up at her. You've been waiting 30 years for someone to open this? You really want me to stop now? Arya said nothing. Jake took that as permission. He powered up the connection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cores began to glow brighter, pulsing in sync with each other. His computer screen flickered, crashed, rebooted itself. And then the entire vault lit up like someone had brought the sun inside. Holographic projections exploded into existence all around him. Jake stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. When he could finally see again, he was standing in what looked like a laboratory. But not his laboratory. This one was full of people working, moving, talking. Ghosts of the past brought back to life through recorded light. The humans he recognized immediately. Scientists in white coats, researchers hunched over computer terminals, technicians adjusting equipment. But working right alongside them were beings Jake had never seen before. Couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. The Ver were beautiful in an alien way. Tall and willowy, they stood maybe 7 feet high but seemed taller because of how gracefully they moved. 4 arms, 2 on each side, moving independently like they each had their own brain. Their skin had a greenish tint that reminded Jake of polished jade stone. Their faces were angular, with large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. No mouths that he could see, but they moved their heads when the humans spoke like they were listening intently. One of the Ver was manipulating a holographic equation with all 4 hands at once, fingers dancing through glowing symbols. A human scientist stood beside them, pointing at something in the display and nodding enthusiastically. They were working together like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Easy. Natural. Like it was the most normal thing in the universe. Translation protocol, Arya's voice cut through the scene. That's what they called it. A method to communicate directly with the architects. Jake tore his eyes away from the projection. Who are the architects? The first species, Arya said. Her voice had changed somehow, carrying more weight than before. The ones who came before anyone else. Millions of years ago, they seeded sentient life across the entire galaxy. Every species that exists today, every civilization, every culture, they all trace back to the architects in some way. And then the architects disappeared. Left nothing but ruins and technology that nobody could understand. The hologram shifted. Now Jake was looking at what appeared to be a briefing room. Human and Ver researchers sitting around a table, presentations flickering on screens behind them. The council forbade all research into architect technology, Arya continued. Said it was too dangerous. Too unpredictable. That species who tried to use it would destroy themselves. But that was a lie. Why lie about it? Jake asked. Control. The hologram changed again. Now he was looking at ancient stone structures on a dozen different worlds. Alien temples. Massive devices that hummed with power. 5,000 years ago, a handful of species discovered architect ruins before anyone else. They learned how to use some of the technology. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to give themselves an advantage over every other species in the galaxy. They formed the council and made themselves the ruling authority. Told everyone they were keeping the peace, maintaining order, protecting younger species from dangers they didn't understand. Jake watched as the scene shifted to show council chambers. Alien politicians arguing, making deals, consolidating power. But the truth was simpler, Arya said. They wanted to stay in charge. If younger species could access architect technology, could communicate directly with the architects themselves if they ever returned, the council's authority would mean nothing. They'd just be old species clinging to stolen power. The hologram focused on two figures now. A human woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a white lab coat with a name badge that read, Dr. Emily Grant, lead researcher. Beside her stood a Ver, slightly taller than the others, with markings on their arms that might have been tattoos or natural coloration. Jake watched as the two of them worked side by side for hours of compressed time. Solving equations. Testing devices. Failing. Trying again. And then, in one moment that made both of them freeze, succeeding. The human and the Ver looked at each other, and then Dr. Grant did something unexpected. She hugged her alien partner. Just threw her arms around them in pure joy. And the Ver, awkward with unfamiliar human customs, slowly wrapped all four arms around her in return. Why would the council ban this? Jake asked quietly. The emotion in that simple gesture hit him harder than he expected. Because it worked, Arya said. Dr. Emily Grant and her partner Ven had nearly completed the translation protocol. They were weeks away from sending a signal that could reach the architects, wherever they were. And that terrified the council. The hologram changed again and Jake's stomach dropped. Council warships, dozens of them, surrounding Prometheus. Ver ships trying to scatter, trying to flee. Human vessels fighting back, outnumbered 5-1. They came without warning, Arya said. Her voice was hollow now. Gave them one chance. Surrender the research, submit to rehabilitation, forget everything they'd learned. Or resist and be eliminated. Jake watched Dr. Emily Grant stand on Prometheus's command bridge. Her face was set, determined. Afraid but refusing to show it. She looked directly at the camera recording her, like she knew someday someone would watch this. We chose to resist, her recorded voice said. The hologram showed what happened next. Ver ships exploding in bright flashes. Human vessels disabled and boarded. Researchers dragged away. And through it all, Dr. Grant working frantically at her console, her fingers flying across the controls. The Ver fleet was destroyed in less than an hour, Arya narrated. The survivors were hunted down over the next 10 years. Tracked to every corner of the galaxy and eliminated. The official council records claim the Ver went extinct from natural causes. Planetary environmental collapse. But that was another lie. And this station? Jake asked. Prometheus was scheduled for complete destruction. But Dr. Grant sabotaged the demolition sequence before they could take her. The council's forces couldn't figure out what she'd done. Rather than risk the station exploding and leaving evidence, they just abandoned it. Marked it as a hazard zone and erased it from the records. The holograms faded. Jake stood in the silent vault, surrounded by the ghosts of people who died for asking the wrong questions. And you? He asked Arya. What are you really? The hologram shimmered, and for just a moment, Jake saw two faces overlapping. Human and Ver. Emily and Ven. I'm what they left behind, Arya said softly. Their final act. A warning and a hope, waiting for someone brave enough to finish what they started. Jake moved into Prometheus completely. He dragged his sleeping bag from the hauler, set up a small heating unit in one of the old lab spaces, and basically made the station his home. There was no point going back and forth. The work was too important, too complicated to keep starting and stopping. The translation protocol wasn't like anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't code in the normal sense. It was mathematics, sure, but mathematics that seemed to twist and fold in ways that made his brain ache just looking at it. Numbers that spiraled into patterns that almost made sense, then didn't, then suddenly did again from a completely different angle. Arya helped him through it, appearing beside him for hours at a time. But Jake started noticing something strange about her. Sometimes she spoke like a human woman, with informal phrases and hand gestures that felt completely natural. Other times her voice took on a different quality, more formal, and she moved her holographic form in ways that reminded him of the Vare he'd seen in the recordings. 4 arms instead of 2. Head tilted at an angle no human would naturally hold. "You're both of them, aren't you?" Jake said one night, staring at a particularly nasty equation that refused to make sense. "Not just an AI based on Emily Grant. You're actually her." "And then too." Arya's projection flickered. "Yes." Our consciousness patterns were uploaded in the final hours before the Council forces breached the station. It was experimental technology, barely tested. We didn't know if it would work. But it was better than letting everything we'd learned die with us. Jake took a long drink of his coffee. It was his last pack and he was rationing it carefully. That must be strange. Being 2 people in one system. It was at first, Arya admitted. Her form shifted again, settling somewhere between human and Vare. But we'd worked together for so long, thought so similarly, that merging wasn't as difficult as you'd imagine. We were already finishing each other's sentences when we were alive. During one of his breaks, Jake pulled up more files from the station's archives. What he found made his blood run cold. The Council's cover-up went deeper than he'd imagined. Falsified incident reports that blamed the Vare extinction on everything from plague to civil war. Scientists who'd questioned the official story, only to die in convenient accidents shortly after. Entire research colonies that had been studying architect ruins, sterilized by orbital bombardment and written off as natural disasters. They murdered thousands, Jake said, scrolling through report after report. Maybe millions. All to keep their power. "Welcome to galactic politics," Arya replied bitterly. "The Council maintains order, they say. They keep the peace. But the price of that peace is truth. And anyone who threatens to expose them." Jake stood up from his workstation and walked to the observation viewport. He'd been staring at screens for so long that his eyes hurt. The stars outside looked the same as they always had, but now he understood what was hidden between them. Ancient ruins on 1,000 worlds. Technology that could change everything. And species like the Council, desperate to make sure nobody else found it. The Council knew, Jake said slowly, the pieces clicking together in his mind. They knew the architects would come back someday. That's why they're so paranoid about this. If the architects return and find out what the Council did in their name, using their technology to build an empire, they'd be finished. Exactly. Arya materialized beside him at the viewport. She pulled up a holographic star chart that hung in the air between them. The beacon we were building here on Prometheus, it wasn't just for sending messages. It was designed to listen to. For 30 years it's been running on minimal power, passively scanning deep space for any sign of architect signals. Jake turned to look at her. And? 3 months ago I detected something. A response signal from beyond the edge of explored space. It's faint but it's getting stronger. The architects are coming back, Jake. Not someday. Not in 100 years. They're close. Maybe weeks away from Council space. Jake felt his heart start pounding. The Council will do anything to control first contact. They'll kill anyone who gets in their way, Arya confirmed. Just like they killed us. Just like they killed the Vare. They can't allow humanity or any other species to speak directly to the architects. Their entire power structure depends on them being the intermediaries, the ones who interpret and control access to architect knowledge. Jake looked back out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beings older than human civilization were heading this way. And the Council would start a war to make sure they controlled the conversation. Can we finish the beacon? Jake asked. Can we actually complete what Emily and Ven started? Arya was quiet for a moment. The protocol is maybe 70% complete. With your help, working together we could finish the final sequence. But Jake, you need to understand what that means. The moment we power up that beacon and send an active signal, every Council sensor array in 10 systems will detect it. They'll know exactly where we are and what we're doing. How long would we have? Hours? Maybe a full day if we're extremely lucky and they're slow to respond. But they'll come. With warships. With troops. They'll do to you what they did to Emily and Venerable. Jake stood there in the silence of the observation deck, weighing his options. He could walk away right now. Take his salvage claim, sell the station to some corporation, and live comfortably for the rest of his life. Never tell anyone what he'd found. Let the council keep their secrets. But then he thought of Emily Grant, standing on this same bridge 30 years ago, knowing she was about to die and choosing truth anyway. He thought of Ven and all the Ver, an entire species erased from history because they refused to bow to the council's lies. Jake had spent 5 years in the Marines fighting for what he thought was right. Maybe it was time to do it again. Fire it up, Jake said. Let's finish what they started. Arya's projection smiled, both faces overlapping, human and Ver together. I was hoping you'd say that. The translation beacon had been running for 18 hours when the ships arrived. Jake was in the command center, monitoring the signal strength, when Arya's voice cut through the silence with an edge of alarm he'd never heard before. Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL. 12 ships. Council signatures. Jake pulled up the external cameras and felt his stomach drop. The warships materialized out of nothing, appearing in perfect military formation around Prometheus. They were massive, each one 10 times the size of his tiny hauler. Weapons systems already powered up, glowing with barely restrained energy. They moved with precision, cutting off every possible escape route. Like wolves surrounding a wounded animal. The communication system crackled to life. Attention salvage vessel. This is Commander Thexus of the Council Enforcement Fleet. You are in direct violation of Galactic Preservation Law, Section 7, Article 12. Power down all systems immediately and prepare for boarding. You have 5 minutes to comply. Jake's hand hovered over the transmitter. His throat was dry. 12 warships against one unarmed hauler and an abandoned station. The smart move was to surrender. Apologize. Claim ignorance. Maybe they'd let him live. But he thought about Emily Grant making this same calculation 30 years ago. He keyed the transmitter. Negative, Commander. I'm Jake Rivers, registered salvage operator with the Independent Spacers Guild. I have a full legal claim to this station under human sovereignty laws. You have no jurisdiction here. There was a long pause. Jake could almost hear the confusion on the other end. Then a different voice came through, much colder, carrying the kind of authority that expected absolute obedience. I am High Commander Korvax, Council Fleet Admiral. Your species' quaint sovereignty laws are completely irrelevant in Council-controlled space. Power down now or we will disable your vessels by force. Jake pulled up his documentation files, the ones he'd carefully prepared over the past week. Funny thing about that, Commander. Prometheus wasn't just a civilian research station. According to the original registration documents from Earth's Defense Ministry, it was classified as a human military research facility. That makes it sovereign human territory, even if it's been abandoned for 30 years. Unless you want to trigger a full diplomatic incident with Earth's Navy, I suggest you back off. Arya appeared beside him, her projection flickering with worry. He's bluffing. Korvax doesn't care about human law. He'll order an attack. I know, Jake whispered back. But I just need a few more minutes. His fingers were already moving across the controls, opening up his transmitter to its maximum range. He set it to broadcast on every frequency his equipment could reach. Commercial channels. Civilian bands. Military emergency frequencies. Public networks where anyone with a receiver could listen in. This is Jake Rivers, former Marine Corps, currently aboard Outpost Prometheus in the Terminus sector, he said, speaking clearly into the open channel. I'm broadcasting this to anyone who can hear. I've discovered proof that the Council has been suppressing first contact with the architects. They've been lying to every species in the galaxy for 5,000 years. And they erased an entire species called the Ver to protect that secret. He started uploading the files. Everything Arya had shown him. Holographic recordings of the massacre 30 years ago. Emily Grant and Ven working together. Council warships destroying Ver vessels. Documents detailing the cover-up, the falsified reports, the assassinated witnesses. Names, dates, locations, atrocities. Gigabytes of data flooding out across every channel. You fool, Korvax's voice cut through, all pretense of civility gone. You've just signed your death warrant. On the view screen, Jake watched weapon systems on all 12 Council ships powering up. Targeting lasers painting Prometheus's hull in dozens of red dots. Maybe, Jake replied, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. But now everyone knows. Every ship captain, every colonist, every government in this sector just received that data. You kill me now, you prove I'm right. You prove the Council is everything I just accused them of being. You let me live, and humanity gets to hear what the architects have to say when they arrive. So what's it going to be, Commander? Your move. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Jake could see it on the tactical display. The Council ships holding position, weapons charged but not firing. Korvax was doing the math, calculating probabilities. If he destroyed Prometheus now, it would look like confirmation. But if he withdrew, it would look like weakness. Behind Jake, the translation beacon signal suddenly intensified. The lights in the command center flickered. Arya's projection stabilized, her eyes going wide. "Jake," she whispered. "They're answering." Jake spun to look at the signal analysis screen. The beacon they'd activated wasn't just sending anymore. It was receiving. A response was coming through, something powerful enough to make the station's instruments scream with feedback. On the view screen, something impossible happened. The stars around Prometheus began to shimmer like heat waves on a desert road. Space itself rippled, bending in ways that made Jake's eyes hurt to watch. The Council warship's formation broke as their instruments went haywire, alarms blaring across every ship. "What is that?" Korvax's voice demanded, the coldness replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Arya's voice was filled with awe and something else. "Victory maybe. Or vindication." The translation protocol worked. "We successfully made contact. The architects received our message." The rippling in space intensified. Jake gripped the edge of his console as the station shuddered. It wasn't a physical force, not exactly. It was like reality itself was being rewritten around them. Like something vast and ancient was pushing through the fabric of space, something so big that the universe had to make room for it. "Message incoming," Arya said, her voice barely audible over the sound of every system on Prometheus activating at once. "Multiple frequencies. Multiple dimensions. Jake, the architects are here. They're actually here." On the view screen, the Council warships were backing away, their weapons powering down. For the first time in 5,000 years, the Council wasn't in control. They weren't the ones who got to speak first. They weren't the intermediaries. A human ex-marine in a salvage hauler had beaten them to it. And whatever was about to happen next, the entire galaxy was watching. The transmission didn't come through the radio speakers or the communication systems. It didn't arrive through any technology Jake understood. Instead, it came through everything at once. Through the walls of the station. Through the metal deck plates beneath his boots. Through the air he was breathing. Through his own body. Jake felt it in his bones, in his chest, behind his eyes. A presence so vast it made him feel smaller than an atom, but somehow it wasn't frightening. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean and feeling the waves lap at your feet. Powerful. Ancient. But not hostile. Words formed directly in his mind. Not English. Not any human language. Not even language in the way he understood it. But somehow, impossibly, he understood every single word with perfect clarity. "Thank you for speaking." Jake's breath caught in his throat. His hands gripped the console so hard his knuckles turned white. "It worked," he whispered. Holy hell, it actually worked. Arya's projection beside him stabilized for the first time since he'd activated the beacon. The flickering stopped. The dual forms of Emily Grant and Ven merged together into something new, something that was both human and Ver but also neither. Something that was simply Arya. "The translation protocol is complete," she said, and her voice carried joy and relief and triumph all at once. "We're actually talking to them. After 30 years. After everything. We're talking to the architects." Jake's hands moved on instinct, opening every communication channel his system could reach. Every frequency. Every band. He set it all to broadcast mode so that every ship, every station, every listening post in range could hear what was happening. "This is Jake Rivers," he said, his voice shaking just slightly. "I'm aboard Outpost Prometheus and I'm in direct contact with the architects. First contact is happening right now and everyone needs to hear this." The presence in his mind spoke again, and this time Jake could feel emotions behind the words. Something like satisfaction. Like a parent watching a child take their first steps. "We have searched for those who would break the silence. We have waited for species brave enough to speak. The ones you call the Council claim to speak for all the young races. They position themselves as our voice, our interpreters. But they lied. They built walls and barriers where we intended gardens and open doors." Jake looked at the view screen. The 12 Council warships were still out there, weapons powered down but not withdrawn. Frozen in place. Every sensor array on those ships was pointed directly at Prometheus. And beyond them, Jake knew hundreds of vessels across multiple systems were listening to this conversation. Recording it. Witnessing it. "Why did you leave?" Jake asked. The question had been burning in his mind since he'd first learned about the architects. Why disappear for millions of years? Why let the council take control of everything you built? The answer came with patience, like a teacher explaining something fundamental to a student. We plant seeds. We do not tend the garden because constant tending prevents natural growth. We create the conditions for life, for consciousness, for civilization. Then we step back and watch what grows. Some species reach for the stars. Some build wonders. Some destroy themselves. This is the nature of free will. But the council found our tools in our ruins and claimed divine authority. They hoarded the harvest, keeping our knowledge for themselves. They told younger species that we had given them the right to rule. But you didn't, Jake said, understanding dawning. We gave no such right. We withdraw when our children learn to speak for themselves. We return when we are called. And you called, Jake Rivers. Humanity called out into the darkness, refusing to accept the walls built around you. Because of the Ver, Jake said quietly. Because humans partnered with them instead of following council rules. Yes. The Ver understood what we intended. They were archivists, preservers of memory and knowledge. They believed that wisdom should be shared, not hoarded. When the council tried to erase them, some fragments of their final transmissions reached us across the vast distances. We have been listening ever since, waiting for another voice brave enough to speak truth against power. Jake turned to look at Arya. Her form was stable now, solid, more real than she'd ever seen before. Emily Grant and Ven died for this, Jake said. Hundreds of Ver were hunted down and killed. All because they wanted to talk to you. The presence in his mind shifted, and Jake felt something that reminded him of sorrow mixed with pride. Not died. Transformed. The one you call Arya carries their wisdom forward into the future. This is evolution, Jake Rivers. Not of bodies, but of consciousness and purpose. This is what we hoped to see when we planted our seeds so long ago. Species choosing cooperation over isolation. Choosing truth over comfortable lies. Choosing to reach out across the void instead of hiding in fear. What happens now? Jake asked. His voice was steadier now. The council isn't going to just accept this. They've spent 5,000 years building their power on your name. Another ripple passed through space itself. On the view screen, Jake saw the council warships shudder as something massive moved through the fabric of reality nearby. Now the architect said, you choose your own path. The council's time as intermediaries is finished. Humanity has proven itself worthy of direct dialogue, as have others who were kept silent. The walls are coming down, Jake Rivers. And your species will help us dismantle them.